everyone for coming. Now the Smiths are here, so we actually can start. You'll notice, you know, they're the loudest, but now they have to be quiet. So it's a perfect time to start. And if you're thirsty, there's wine and beer. Please, everyone, help yourself. The refrigerator is it's for everybody. So I want to thank Pro Photo Daily, Epson, American Photography, and the great people here at PhotoShelter. You know, they're always right on time to help us. Whenever I call, you know, we arrange a date, and they're just the greatest. And I cannot thank them enough. So on top of that list is Andrew Fingerman, who's a very dear friend of mine, who's the CEO, and Rachel Brown and Christina here, who organizes everything. Young lady there right by the wall, she's holding up down there. I'm really very grateful for all of them. And we have two terrific presenters tonight, Glenn Batkin and Deb Fong. Who have been wonderful. Also, if everyone could, when you get a chance, subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Projections NYC. I'll wait for everyone to do that. And I should get over 50 with you folks here, so that would be great. Before we start, Jeremy is going to give us a little rundown on what PhotoShelter does, and then right after that we'll start.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. As Frank said, our CEO could not be here tonight, but so I've been asked to say a few words. I'm on the marketing team at PhotoShelter, and whenever we get a chance to kind of host these things and get people together, it's always a joy. So thank you all for coming to our office and spending some time. Yeah, so like Frank said, a little bit about PhotoShelter. For nearly 20 years now, I was just looking at the date before this. We've been supporting photographers and creatives as they store, organize, and share their work. So if you are not familiar and you want a place to store all your photos, organize your stuff, send to clients and family and friends, we have an awesome software that continues to grow for all the creatives who kind of need that in their life. So if you want to go to photoshelter.com or reach out to our team, you can learn about a lot more about what we offer. It's a lot more than a storage platform for photographers. So if you're looking to kind of elevate your workflow and do more with your photos, I'm happy to speak with any of you tonight. But enough about me and PhotoShelter. Although we are the office that we house tonight's presentation in, that is about these lovely creatives. So I'm excited to learn about you guys and see your work too. So thank you all for being here again, and I hope you have a great night.
Thank you. And now, Deborah Fong.
Thank you. Okay, don't clap until I get the technology actually functioning. Let's see if I can get this shared first. Can everyone hear me, or do I need to use the microphone? Use the mic? Louder. This is the first time ever Divya has told me to be louder. Let's see if I can get this going. Okay, is this working? Yes. All right, perfect. First, thank you so much to Frank for inviting me to present tonight. I've long had this as a dream, so appreciate the opportunity very much. And special thanks to my very good friend, Glenn. We go way back, and I appreciate you nominating me to be your co-presenter tonight. So thank you both. So yeah, my name is Deb Fong. I have been photographing for about 24 years now. I am a little bit different than a typical project photographer. No judgment, obviously, around that. And I have friends here who are nudging me in different directions. We'll get to that a little bit later. But I often joke that my project is my life. I have friends here. My husband is on the line, so I'm sure they can interpret all the jokes from that. So yes, feel free to interpret. It's all probably true. But photographically speaking, also, my project is definitely my life. What I've tried to do tonight to help bring that to clearer life is to organize my chosen body of work thematically, a little bit sequentially as well, kind of nest within, and that will make more sense as I get into the content itself. I also believe it's really important everything okay? Okay, I also think it's really important as a photographer to continue to evolve as we as human beings evolve, and I think you'll see that thread come to life hopefully tonight as well. So with that brief preface, I will go ahead and jump right in. A key part of my approach to my work and the way when I even go out photographing is to make sure I'm always embracing the curiosity of a child. And I know that it has become a little bit cliche, but it's something that I hold very dear. It actually also manifests a little bit literally in my work as well. I think it's important to really kind of engage with the world the way that a child does in some ways, at least figuratively speaking. You know, you watch a child, and I'm not a mother, so I do this, you know, sort of, you know, secondhand, if you will, but they touch everything. They, you know, they're putting things in their mouths, they're smelling everything. And I know that can get them into a lot of trouble. So I get that. But there's also something really beautiful about the way that they try to make the world, I think, much more reachable and tangible, and to really engage with it very viscerally. And so I try to do that very much figuratively with my work as well. There's also an important element of play, I think, with kids. I think as adults, sometimes we lose sight of that. I definitely like to infuse that into my work as well. And honestly, just the pure concept of joy. So at a pretty young age, not as a child, but as a young adult, I really started to discover my travel bug. Inner explorer, very much part of who I am. I've had the great fortune of visiting, I think, 52 countries up to this point and living in a couple, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And what I realized quite early on is the importance of being able to capture not just what's literally in front of you, I mean, that's fine, but also being able to put your own spin on it, to interpret visually what's around me. And so I started to do that in all the ways that I could. And I also thought it was really important to peel back some of those layers, right? Because I think sometimes photography is less about the pretty photograph. It's about telling a story. And so this is in India. Some of you may recognize some of this, my friends included. I think this is something that, you know, it's not necessarily a classically pretty photograph, but it tells a story of what it means. Am I speaking too quickly? Sorry, I'm such a New Yorker. Sorry, I will slow down. It's my natural pace, apologies. So this is India, speaking of fast pace. So this is perfectly timed. Some of the chaos of the traffic that I think you can see in some of the larger cities, even in some of the countrysides, if you will. But what I thought was so interesting about a place like this is there's sort of this unplanned, unchoreographed dance, but yet they somehow all know how to move. And I've seen this in many places around the world. I guess we do a version of that here, even in Manhattan. But I think this was, you know, just a lot of fun to capture. Sometimes you'll see vehicles, you'll see animals, all the things. So I do lean into the chaos once in a while because that's also part of reality, but I think it's also important to look for those moments of beautiful serenity as well. And what I've also found, at least for me individually, is that sometimes they find me. And what I mean by that is I don't even realize that I'm looking for it until it's there. And I so appreciate it in the moment. And those are the kind of places where I tend to linger for quite a long time, not just to photograph, but just to experience. I love being in the middle of a wide open landscape. You know, I'm not necessarily the most outdoors person. I wouldn't survive very long on my own, I have to be quite honest, but there are these experiences like here. This is in Tanzania in the Serengeti. We were actually running away from the storm that you can kind of see forming on the horizon in the backdrop there. But there was just something about this. Even though there's a storm looming, there is this sense of great peace and serenity. And these wide open landscapes, I think, sometimes remind us how small we are. But yet there's also something counterintuitively so reassuring about that. Maybe it makes the small things we kind of navigate every day to day that, you know, are bothersome to us or that, you know, get on our nerves. Maybe they start to fall away a little bit and we get a new perspective. We're photographers, after all, so we search for light. I search for it everywhere, of course, as everyone does in this room, and virtually, of course, who's a photographer. It's core to who we are. So obviously, I'm always looking for things in great light. But it's also, I think, you know, when I travel, important to uncover some of those cultural local truths. This is in Myanmar. It's a traditional form of fishing that is, you know, unfortunately dying. Obviously, modernization has that effect, but this is something that, you know, those diehard fishermen still continue to perpetuate. And I was fortunate to actually find one. He was a real fisherman. There are, by the way, a lot of tourist traps around this, but this was a real fisherman. They have a sort of dance-like movement in how they fish, which I think is quite unusual. I haven't seen it elsewhere in the world, at least to date. And many of you know, many of you who do know my work know that I really love dance and movement. And so it's probably not too surprising that I really lean into this.
So Deb,
Yeah.
before you go, are you going with an idea or are you going to an area and then you just live within that space and you find?
I think it's a little bit of both. My husband's on, so he's listening to see whether I'm truthful about this. I am in the ultimate planner, and so there is a lot of planning that happens, of course, especially when you're traveling. And my reason for that, without going into all the details in the interest of time, is, we have a short amount of time. Like I was in Myanmar, we were in Myanmar for maybe 7-10 days, something like that. You're just scratching the surface. And so I do feel this compulsion to optimize that time as much as possible. So I will tend to pack some things in, but my husband has gotten me to a place of compromising and relaxing a little bit. And sometimes to, I think the point you're getting to, it's not just about the stuff you plan, it's about the stuff that happens in between. I think that's a really important thing that I've learned as a photographer, but also as a human, including talking. So thank you for the reminder. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. Sometimes I think I'm going there to actually capture something specific, and I will do that. But I think it's also something that I've learned to do much more adeptly, which is to always be looking around me to make sure that I'm seeing everything that's happening behind me, to my side, not just what's literally right in front of me. Sometimes it is just about the light. So this could be, I suppose, a dirt road anywhere in the world, but this is in Myanmar, so it's particularly special for me. My guide laughed when I asked him to stop in the middle of the road. We were going somewhere, to your point. We were going to a destination. I was like, you gotta stop. Please stop. And he says, why? It's a dirt road. I said, turn around and look at the light. And he said, okay, I understand. There's also something to your question, Frank, about looking for some of those icons. But I think it's still incumbent upon us to, as photographers, look for some different perspectives. So yes, there's the classic photographs of all the temples. I enjoyed really seeing them in silhouette. I think there's something so beautifully graphic about them, and the light was just perfect. So of course.
You have those 7 days I'm gonna be here, or 10 days there. Having that sort of being in that time capsule, does that have a particular type of motivation for you? I've got to get it, I don't have any time to rest or this or that. Like, how does that work for you?
The short answer is yes. I feel a little bit of self-imposed pressure, probably a lot of self-imposed pressure, but like I said, I've gotten to a better place of being a little bit more balanced and realizing that sometimes you can't just schedule stuff. Sometimes I've actually had my most compelling moments and some of my best photographs from just literally walking around. I might not even actually have my camera at the ready per se, but just the sheer act of observing, which obviously is a huge part of what we do in order to actually create great photographs. So a number of years ago, my husband and I decided to move to Hong Kong. I joke that it took about 9 months for me to be convinced to go and 2 weeks for me to fall in love with it. My husband likes to take all the credit for that. But it was an incredible experience. So, we were sort of at the phase of being, sort of honeymoon expats. It's the first time both of us had actually lived abroad, and we absolutely relished. I do think, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think this was one of the best times of our lives. It's obviously a pretty different place now, and not to say that's, bad fully, but of course it is evolved. So I dug in, and some of the images here you'll see are representing some of the icons. If any of you have been to Hong Kong, you've probably seen these famous red ships, which are, it's basically a branded ship called Aqua Luna. They're fantastic, and they're visually, a great way to anchor around Victoria Harbor. Hong Kong is famous, of course, for their high-rise buildings. Some of you may have seen documentaries, though, that go a little bit below that surface. And so while I love this picture and pictures like this that I have taken that really focus on, the color of these buildings that are sprawling, when you take a closer look, of course, you realize the realities, which is you have families who are often many numbered, let's just say, and they're crammed into the equivalent of a studio apartment. And so I think sometimes it's important to have the beauty of the photograph to bring people into it, but then also have the curiosity to dive a little bit deeper into it and understand some of the realities behind the image. One thing that I didn't realize, which is my own point of embarrassment, is that Hong Kong is actually full of nature. So I had been bombarded, as many of us have been, with all the pictures of high rises and the glossy skyscrapers, and there's definitely that element, but 75% of Hong Kong is actually either protected nature or just, untouched land. And a lot of it is mountainous. I literally had no idea until I was in a plane hovering over Hong Kong, and I gasped. That doesn't happen very often anymore. I was super surprised. This is Dragon's Back, which is not a hard trek by any means. I wouldn't even call it a trek. It's a hike. I squeezed this in actually shortly before we decided to leave Hong Kong, but it really was important to me to capture this other side of the city, because I think so many of us just really see the stereotype of Hong Kong and don't go again to that other level and see, the beautiful nature that's, very much a part of the local culture. So a few years later, we decided to move to the Netherlands. And there's something about this 2-week thing. So 2 weeks later, I unpacked my bags and then repacked them and basically said, well, we're on the peak of the Northern Light cycle. I need to go. And so I decided to go by myself to finished Lapland, right in the heart of the Arctic Circle. It was freezing. I don't do great in the cold, but it's worth it. I spent 3 nights there and I was super lucky. The second full night that I was there, we had this display. Our guide actually during this was, or is, I should say, also a photographer. And, he noticed, of course, I was photographing, as many people were. And he said, you're so lucky. And I said, well, I hope so, because, we did this in Iceland, didn't see a damn thing. So it's about time, but we were super lucky. He actually been doing this entire life. And he said it was one of the top 10 displays he'd ever seen in his entire lifetime. And it just went on. We actually had to leave because it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. It's like, we gotta go. We can't keep watching this. So really, really glorious. My first time. And so obviously room for improvement. But I'm a little bit hooked. And now that the cycle is at its peak again, we will actually be heading back to the Arctic Circle. I've convinced Mark to join me this time, my husband. We'll be going in December actually to Swedish Lapland, and we'll be spending a full 5 days. So,
So
4 hours of daylight. We'll
you
see.
mentioned Mark a bunch of times.
Yes.
How
He loves that, by the way.
how did you bring him into this world of yours, and how did that, evolve?
I'm sure he's laughing right now. He's on the Zoom call, but the short answer is I kind of tortured him for a number of years before he kind of, got, or I should say, we kind of got into a rhythm together. I'm a little, as you might gather, obsessive, as I think photographers tend to be. I'm very focused on details, very much focused on being out as much as possible and photographing as much as I can. And that's, not necessarily his personality, especially when he's on quote unquote holiday. So particularly when we would travel, this is something I think that he had to really adjust to. And then finally, put a stake in the ground and said, this is too much. we need to strike a different balance. And again, going back to your original question, that actually helped, be a real significant impetus for me to rethink how we actually engage in these experiences. And sometimes, again, and I need this reminder once in a while, that travel especially is not just about taking photographs. Of course, that's part of it for me, but it's also about the actual experiences. And of course, spending time with people that you care about. Mark, of course, being one of them. Trevor.
And just so you know, next week we're gonna have Mark.
Oh, no.
Well, to this presentation.
Fantastic. Trevor. I'm making him look fantastic. Are you kidding? No, I mean, joking aside, I'm very grateful actually that he helped instill that balance. I needed it, and I actually think it helped me improve my work enormously. He used to be, I love that you're asking that. I hope he can hear this. Mark, are you my Sherpa still? I've started to lighten my load a little bit, so I don't think I need the Sherpa as much, but yes, sometimes I do ask him to help with some of the heavier gear. Obviously being in Western Europe, it's very easy to get around the region. It's one of the things I really miss about being in that part of the world. Hop on a plane, hop on a train, be almost anywhere else in an hour or two. I was traveling around quite a bit, as you would gather, but not just to photograph. And I was on a lot of early morning flights, which kind of drove me crazy because I'm not a morning person, but there is something really beautiful about being on a plane in early morning light, of course. And so as much as I wanted to sleep a little bit and catch up and get a nap in, I never did. I think very rarely did I ever do that. Probably never. I was always, just looking out just to see what I could see. And this was 10 minutes outside of London City Airport. I had no idea they actually had this kind of land outside. I loved the winding road. I loved the mist and the fog. My husband later pointed out to me that there's a heart at the top, and now that's all I can see. But that is not why I took this picture, just to be clear. So of course, we're in the Netherlands. We were in Rotterdam, not Amsterdam, but spent quite a bit of time in Amsterdam. And so, they're famous for their waterways. And I think most of the photographs you typically see are focused on the canals, and it's usually at street level. And it's very idyllic and very charming. But again, love the aerial view. This was another very early morning flight. I think I was headed to Milan on this, but I love that it showcased, I think, the waterways around and the culture that's very much informed by water in the Netherlands in a different way.
Do you ever think of using a drone?
The short answer is yes. I have not gone that direction yet, but yes, definitely something I would like to explore a little bit more. I'm not a tech person, so I need guidance and help on that. But I think with the right motivation and a little bit of a kick, I could probably go there. But yeah, thinking about it. I'd love to look for imagery that plays a little bit. Again, going back to the child metaphor I started with. I don't know if you see it, so if you don't, I get it, but when I was walking across, Amsterdam, they're famous for their trams in addition to their waterways. And I just saw this sort of flattened robot on the ground. And I just, poised myself into the middle of the street. They didn't love me for this. I did wait for a few trams. I wanted the eyes of that tram to be in exactly the right place. So yes, this is a photograph that I had to be a little patient with, and so did the tram conductor. Rotterdam, not classically beautiful, similar to Amsterdam, but I have a lot of respect. They are famous for their very contemporary architecture, which I deeply appreciate. And so this is actually near their central train station. I was actually on a work call during this, so if any of my teammates are listening, I promise I was paying attention, sort of. But I loved the light here, of course. Late afternoon, sun setting, you see the sunlight bouncing off the building in the background. And I just waited until, I wanted a female figure to come in with a dress and with heels. And the reason for that, in addition to, the classic elegance of that, is the Peter Lindbergh photograph that you see in the background. There was an exhibition taking place, and I want something that would just kind of help mirror some of that imagery as well. And this is one of the last photographs I actually took in Rotterdam from inside the train station, something that I had been through probably hundreds of times and never really paid attention to and realized I had to. So what I also realized, you've got all this beauty, but people really are what make the place, or who, I should say, make the place. And I'm an animal lover, so I will say animals too. Going back for a moment to Hong Kong, I had a chance to embed in a lot of the local cultural traditions, had a chance to learn a little bit about my own heritage in the process. Anybody know what this is? Of course they're boats, but dragon boats, of course, Eric knows from Hong Kong. I'm fascinated by dragon boats. They're highly competitive. This is not just a fun sport for them. They take it very seriously. I love the colors and the energy. And there's a little bit of a brief color nod in the background. That's the reflection of a shipping container in the back, which, is very much part of Hong Kong's not just history and legacy, but very much current day. And we were there at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution, not Cultural Revolution, the Umbrella Revolution, sorry. And we weren't there for the full trajectory, of course, of this movement. And obviously as expats, we didn't have the same experience and the same thoughts that locals did. But we felt it was an incredibly important moment in time to understand more about local people and what they were thinking. And by the way, and Eric will keep me honest on this, but we had a chance to have, lots of conversations with many different people, different backgrounds, different ages, and there were lots of different opinions actually about it. It wasn't just one unified opinion. And sometimes I think that's what the press gets wrong a little bit. So for political reasons and all of that, I will not go into all the details, but suffice to say, it's something that I think resonated with us deeply as, a very specific commentary on the state of Hong Kong at that point in time. And it was important for us to engage and for me to, photograph at least a little bit of that.
So Deb, you're there at that particular time, and that this movement has energy and it's going to keep on going. How does it get to you that now I have to leave?
So it wasn't the reason that we left, to be honest. I think even, with the realities of the movement, we probably would have stayed. And like I said, it took me 2 weeks to fall in love with this place. I think Mark loved it even more than I did. I would have been willing to stay for many more years. There were work commitments and obligations and career trajectories that were calling our names elsewhere. And so we made a decision, but it was not because of this. But to maybe answer part of your question too, we have many friends, of course, who did stay. And from their perspective, and I'm just, speaking a little bit on their behalf, but it did affect, not initially. Of course, it's much more of a local movement than it is involving expats, but it does impact expats and everybody who's there after a while. The condensed portion of Hong Kong that everyone transits through is quite small, actually, compared to other cities. And so, it hits you every single day. And so I think there was a bit of a burden. And I say that loosely because I realize there's more importance to this movement than just, the inconvenience to those transiting through. But I think for folks who didn't take this as seriously or didn't take it so much to heart because they weren't locals, this did impact them in different ways. And particularly if they had kids, they probably felt they needed to go elsewhere to explore other places. I love these sort of moments that seem transitory, but there's a lot more meaning to them. This is a child, I only had a chance to engage with him for maybe a few minutes, but we played a little bit of hide and seek. I was drawn initially to, the light and shadow, of course, which I thought was absolutely stunning. This is a young monk in training, as you probably would gather, and he is in the process of the daily alms. It's a routine where they go around to the locals to get food to sustain them for the day. He noticed me, and we just started playing this little game, but I got him, in the split second that he was between slats. Some moments just, again, the light, but also about seeing locals doing what they're doing. I try to be very respectful, especially in situations like this or scenarios like this, where, obviously quiet and respect is really, really important, but I feel still compelled to capture. Moments of sadness or apparent sadness, I think, are also important. I love joy, but I also think it's important to capture the spectrum of humanity and our emotional range. This is one of my most important early photographs. I captured this, I won't tell the whole story in the interest of time, but 3 Vietnamese children where I was backpacking in North Vietnam. And the sad reality is that, of course, you can see this is not exactly a happy photograph, but it is to me a photograph of strength. They unfortunately have to spend most of their days by themselves because their parents, they're farmers and they're out in the rice paddies harvesting or maintaining the fields or the paddies. And so you have these very young children. I don't think these could have been any older than maybe between, I would say, like 5 to 8 at most. I debated whether to photograph them, to be honest, without their parents present, but thinking that I had good intentions behind this, I felt it was an important story to share because sometimes we just see the glossy side of travel, and it doesn't really do justice to the realities of local people. And so, we couldn't communicate. I don't speak Vietnamese and they didn't speak English. So I just kind of motioned to them with the camera, got down on a knee and just asked them to kind of do what they do. And I just thought what was so beautiful is the older sister here, as you can see in the center, just instinctively wrapped her arms around her siblings. And I just thought, what a beautiful moment is this. What I also love is you can see her sister is on your visual right, but to the older girl's left, there's this look of defiance, and she stayed like that. That was just the way she is. And so when I see this, I see actually resilience, not just sadness. But sadness is a real thing. Sometimes you actually capture images, that look happy and there's actually sadness, beneath that. And this is a face I won't forget. I won't go into the full story, but this is a child that I met on the street he is actually a street child in India. And I could tell that he was actually probably quite ill. But I also look, like I said, for moments of joy and for interesting characters. I joked before Instagram became a thing that he would become famous and he laughed. And I think I've actually seen him on multiple Instagram feeds since then. So I think he's made it. Again, joy. I mean, kids embody this and I think exude this the most. I decided to insert this not because I think it's a fantastic photograph, but I think to your earlier questions, Frank, it speaks to me about sometimes a photograph is not just about the photograph, it's about the experience of taking the photograph. What you do in India, you can't drive as a foreigner. And so we were oftentimes in the backseat of cars, but I would always have my window down because of course I'm always looking for these moments. And so we saw this beautiful family and I asked our driver to pull over and I just, I asked if they would be okay with me photographing them. And of course they smiled and they gave me permission and I just couldn't stop laughing because as you can see, this gentleman whipped out his phone just as instinctively as I was taking his picture, he just whipped out his phone and started taking pictures of me. And so it gives me a little bit of a giggle now to think about, maybe he has deep in his phone archive somewhere a snapshot of me, like I have a snapshot of him. Speaking of humor, security guard in China, not doing exactly the best job. I like to look for moments like this. More security guards not doing their job. This is in a storefront in Taiwan. I also like, I said, kids lean into just who they are, or they just are who they are. And I think that's really beautiful, but sometimes they ham it up for the camera a little bit. This little boy just amused me because he was all smiles and laughs before I took the photograph. And then his instinct when I started, photographing was to, put on this tough look. And I just love the juxtaposition of his expression against his very gentle father. I love that kids can get messy and still be incredibly beautiful. This is a photo which, my instinct was to crop after I actually captured it because, you see the trash and you see the shattered windows and all the things. But if you actually remove her from the image, you might see an image of, something that is ramshackled or something that's sad. But once you put her into the photograph, you see there's actually joy. She's fine. She's great. I mean, I didn't have a chance to unfortunately get to know her. She was actually on her phone doing business the whole time, but she was all giggles and laughter as we walked by. And I think sometimes it's important to, not make assumptions about people's conditions or how they live and how they feel. And I also think it's important to not just, again, just to pick beauty for beauty's sake. I think it's important to show the realities. When in Cuba, smoke a cigar, but also then meet the guy who makes your cigar. Sometimes your friends help you actually lean into culture a little bit more. So this is in Colombia. Our friends Maria and Gael, who are featured in the center here, had just gotten married. And one of the traditions there in Cartagena actually is to bring dancers out into the street and just party. And of course, they did this in beautiful light. So I was very grateful for that. I won't spend a lot of time here. I know people have mixed feelings about taking photographs of people who are wearing elaborate makeup or costumes and that sort of thing, because it's almost too easy to take compelling photographs, and I get that. But I think what sometimes we miss is that behind the elaborate makeup are real traditions and culture. This is Dia de Muertos. We actually didn't have a chance to do this in Oaxaca because of timing, but we did do this in Mexico City, and they have very much made it their own. I'll pause here just for a second also because I joke that this is one of the most expensive photographs I ever taken. And the reason for that, so this is photographed in Venice during their Carnival celebration, and I was photographing through a cafe window. While this was being photographed, so you get a sense of what was happening, of course, obviously drawn to it for, all the elaborate, ballroom type of costume. But this is the reality behind the scenes. I actually forgot that I had taken this, Frank, and of course, I was digging through my archive this past weekend. And it's like, oh, I got to put this in here too, because sometimes it's good to see the behind the scenes. And it's probably exactly at this moment that I had 400 euros stolen from my wallet in my bag, didn't feel a thing, and then noticed 10 minutes later after a fellow tourist said, I think your wallet is on the ground. So, okay, I was upset. It was 400 euros. I don't know if I was followed. I had just gone to the ATM. So maybe, or I was just honestly a great professional and I was upset. But then I was like, that's skill. So kudos. But then also this ended up being an inspiration. Mark and I decided to take an additional path in our life. And we actually designed a photography bag that would actually help prevent theft. And it would be hyper organized and allow me to be in a position while photographing to not constantly be worried, especially if I don't have someone with me. That's an example of it. I promise I'm not selling you bags. We did develop a full line of bags and we actually got a patent on our insert and all that, but decided not to make a business out of it. So I'm donating those bags actually to my friend's fantastic organization called Silver Linings, where they support entrepreneurs. But I think this is an important pivotal point in my life, not just as a photographer. Again, I think sometimes it's about not necessarily looking for the stuff that's fantastical, but the everyday moments. This was up in Maine this past fall. I love light, as you can gather. I love birds as well. And the gentleman who you don't see his face here, but it was because I love the light and the birds so much. His name is Spinner, and I got a chance to talk to him for about an hour. He noticed I was photographing. And I asked for permission, and I basically, got, a mini lecture in a positive way over the next hour about the life of these birds. He is a local artist and he goes out and feeds them every single day. And in some ways, I think this photograph actually captures him the best, even though you don't see his face because of his love for the birds. Like I said, animals also make the place. One of my other favorite things about being, in the Arctic Circle, of course, are the dogs. They look super ferocious, right? But they're really not. And so this is the benefit of, having the before and after. Of course, the family that was taking care of these dogs every day saw me not being able to put my camera down because I love photographing the dogs so much. And they invited me to spend some time with them that afternoon after the dog sledding adventure so that I could just kind of hang out and get to know them a little bit. And I love this moment of tenderness. I think it speaks volumes about, who these creatures really are. Animals are great for humor. Of course, on first pass, even in the moment, I thought these were just birds. Doing their thing on the rocks, and then looked closer and of course realized this is not a rock. Those are hippos, if you can't see the details on that. And this is, basically a picture that shows the beauty of symbiosis at work. I like taking intense portraits of animals as well. I think there's something that helps us relate to them a little bit more when we see them head on like this. I'm obviously doing this with a telephoto. He did meet my eyes, but I did not meet his. But of course, did take the photograph. And of course, it doesn't communicate, the motion, but you can see, a little bit of these giraffes. They, I'm sure you know how they, of course, ambulate, but they walk with this elegance. And I also just loved how they kind of work together through this motion and then walk towards us. And, the intertwining of their legs and their necks very much mirrored the acacia trees in the background. And like I said, I love birds. And I think, paying attention to the details of them helps bring their beauty, really makes their beauty really come alive. And of course, the evolutionary mirror. We had a chance to go trekking with gorillas in Uganda. This was both a terrifying moment and one of the most astonishing, beautiful moments of my life. I still can't believe we did it. We did survive, of course, but there is something very, very powerful about being, face to face with creatures like this. So then we came back to New York. I'm going to speed through some of this just in the interest of time, but I came back with sort of this romanticized notion of what New York would be. And I actually had not spent a lot of time photographing New York when we lived here before we moved away, which is astonishing to me now to this day, but better late than never. And so started looking for ways to capture the city, but in ways that may be a little bit different. Of course, this being one example. It's from Brooklyn, looking towards Manhattan. I love photographing storms, don't love being caught in them, but love photographing them.
Yeah, so Deb, how do you do that? Knowing that the city has been shot every which way. How do you accept that challenge that I'm going to bring something different to it?
I think part of it was a little bit easier for me because I actually had not spent time photographing it before. So after being abroad for 6, 7 years or so, I came back with very fresh eyes. And, I came back almost like I was a visitor. In some ways, I felt like I was learning the city all over again. And honestly, I think New York especially is an example of a city that's constantly in flux. I feel like there's always something. I mean, and now this is maybe a testament to that because we've been back now for 5.5 years. I still see the city with very fresh eyes. I believe that. And I think it's also part of how you think about where you live. Do you love it? And I can't say I love everything about New York. I love most about New York. But I do know that there are these compelling moments around every corner. And that's something I've learned from several mentors before me. Eclipses, we're used to seeing those in the context of nature. I kind of love the fact that this ball of, the moon is basically hanging between buildings. And then 2020 hit. And obviously I don't need to tell you, those realities, but obviously COVID hit home. I actually did not photograph COVID the way that many other photographers did, and not that that's good or bad, but I had my reasons, I suppose. But I am drawn to solitary figures and solitude, and I'm sure there's deep psychological reasons for that. COVID, was one way that I guess my silver lining, I could, engage in the city in this sort of way. But the quietude was disturbing. It was hard to find moments of humor in the middle of all of that. But there was one day, 2 months after lockdowns, and as you can see, there's really nobody still around, but found this squirrel and we had a little moment and, it kind of made me chuckle a little bit because I thought, I feel you, man. Like, I feel like this, barricaded, you kind of can get out, but you're not really able to get out. And that was the day before this happened. So the murder of George Floyd had a massive impact on me, as I think it did on so many people, of course, around the world. And, it took me a few days to make a decision to get out there, but after about 4 or 5 days, I completely made a pivot. And this became the focus, almost entire focus of my, photographic subject matter, if you will. I leaned very hard into this, and I was out almost every day, sometimes multiple times a day, whenever I had the time. And of course, I don't have to tell anyone here, this became, the inception of one of the most important movements of our time. And I was just very compelled to be part of this set of communities coming together to support the Black communities of New York, but of the world, to be honest. I felt it was very empowering to actually see other communities, some that I didn't expect, to kind of show up, in solidarity. And there was, a lot of anger, a lot of understandable anger and frustration and sadness. But again, I also looked for those moments of joy. I think it's really, really important to show that balance. Also, moments of levity. I don't know if you can see this in the back, but superheroes kind of in the foreground. And I kind of love the expression of the guy in the mask where I focused. These two walk by and we have no idea. I still have no idea why they were wearing their costumes. This was in the middle of a bike protest. But also looking for different ways to, demonstrate, or protest. Sometimes you can think of something like music to be a form of protest, or spoken word, even fashion as a way of expressing self-identity. It's the trans pride flag. And ultimately, especially given the realities of George Floyd and so many who precede him and unfortunately follow after him, in the sense of, Black boys who, one day go from being super cute and harmless to being perceived as something much different. This is Owen. He was 15 at the time I photographed him. He's now, I think, 19 and off in college, and very excited for him, but I also worry about him. This ended up being, I think, one of my most powerful photographs. And I've had, a lot of comments, I think, from people who see the simplicity of it, but then when you look at his face and the realities of the moment in time in which I captured this, it does mean a lot more than what you see on face value. This was actually a semi-finalist in the Smithsonian Portrait Gallery competition in 2022. And then, I had a personal turning point. So sorry, I didn't really warn. So this is Noel. Obviously during the height of COVID, there was a rise in anti-Asian hate, very disturbing for so many people. And the first time that I actually felt extremely vulnerable in a city that I love so much. It was a very disorienting feeling. He was one of the first victims in New York, at least that was, publicly known or widely known. He was slashed, as you can see here, he's recovered, fairly nicely considering, but he was slashed almost from ear to ear on the subway with a box cutter. And I went to go hear him speak the first time that he kind of came out to share his story. And, I think the most compelling thing that I learned from him was it wasn't the attack. I mean, obviously that was devastating and horrible, but he was most devastated and heartbroken that no one came to help him. And so that actually ended up being a huge impetus for me to get out there again. And so I kept going with this focus, but, different community, of course. And obviously it was very deeply personal for me at this point. And so, yes, the whole range of emotions again, sadness and disappointment and fear and anxiety, but also looking for moments of beauty and ways to celebrate cultures and how they've been adapted into America. And ultimately, you know, I learned through the course of those few years that it was important for us to stand up for ourselves, but it was perhaps even more important that we actually, you know, lift each other up. And so, you know, I really took so much from these different communities actually coming together to help each other. So you've already seen, you know, my love letter to New York. I will zip through some of these as well, but, you know, we're in a different place. Like I said earlier, to your question, Frank, you know, the city continues to evolve, and that's what keeps me really stimulated and engaged. I love the culture and the arts here. It's one of the main reasons that I stay here, and I think this will be a forever home, at least on some level. I adore dance, and so especially outdoors, if I can find ways to, you know, observe dance or to work with dancers, I jump on that, no pun intended, sorry. I look for, you know, other creatives who are really pushing the envelope and doing things that are, you know, a little bit different. This was actually a very sad performance. It was an in memoriam tribute to a choreographer named Jennifer Mueller, who had recently passed. I couldn't make up the timing of these birds if I tried, but, you know, it's a little bit of planning as well as a little bit of luck. I love street dancers, especially in front of, you know, icons like the carousel. I'm sure you all recognize in Brooklyn. And like I said, you know, diversity I think is huge, and I love the way that that comes into New York. This is a nexus of so many different kinds of communities. This is a dance company called Dancing Wheels. They periodically come to New York, and as you can gather from this image, they really celebrate, you know, variably bodied individuals with different, you know, abilities, physically speaking, including those who are wheelchair bound. This is one of the few dance performances I've seen where I actually was moved to tears. It was a really powerful, moving performance. And sometimes it's just about the simple moments, you know, the things that you kind of see every day and then they just pass you by and you don't really notice it, but a photograph helps stop those forever, you know, embraces and a kiss perhaps. And again, sometimes, you know, a little bit of humor doesn't hurt. And I love, you know, again, the fact that cultures, you know, come into, of course, New York in so many different ways, like tango, you know, making right here and you can't see their faces, but these are actually Chinese American dancers who are performing tango just because they love it so much. And so I've now been on a journey, and this is maybe the silver lining for me after all of the anti-Asian hate, of really looking much more inward and, you know, kind of having a personal reckoning with my heritage. I don't think I grew up thinking very much about the fact that I'm third generation Chinese American. That is what I am. And I had no shame about it, but I never really spent a lot of time thinking about it too much. I mean, I had, you know, some exposure, of course, my grandparents, my parents, but, you know, most of what my grandparents did when they came here you know, in the 1900s was to assimilate. And so a lot of this wasn't really passed down so much. So in some ways, I feel at an older age, I am now coming into a place of actually learning about where I come from a little bit more. And so now seeing it through the lens of New York and how we actually incorporate some of those cultural elements has been really fascinating for me. So there's a joke. Yeah.
How does that affect you to all of a sudden feel that when you never felt it before?
It's a mixture. I mean, I think sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming, but I'm at great peace with it, generally speaking. And, you know, we can talk about this, you know, separately, you know, during drinks or intermission or afterwards, but, and some of my friends here know that I'm leaning towards a few projects, I think, to explore that a little bit more specifically, because I think that helps me from a self-identity perspective. So my overall take is I actually feel in some ways maybe relieved that I'm in a place now before I get too old to actually appreciate this and have a mindset of being open to learning more, that, you know, that it's only upside, quite honestly. And I feel, I mean, I hate to go back to the metaphor, but I'll do it. It's kind of like being a child again in that way, right? Because normally speaking, you know, a lot of kids might have grown up with this a lot more significantly than I did. And by the way, it's not a critique against my parents. I understood why they did it. But it's kind of it's a relief, and it's a little bit of a refreshing feeling to now say, there's this whole other dimension that's core to who I am, that I actually know very little about, but now here I am at my age actually being, you know, in a position to be able to explore that much more deeply. So I'm excited about it, actually.
And are you more sympathetic to things that you weren't paying attention to before?
Very much.
To Spanish people and Black people and all the rest?
Yeah, very much. I mean, I think that's also rounded out by spending time, you know, living abroad. That had a huge impact on me. You know, I often said after moving abroad, that the thing I appreciated the most about New York and what I missed most about New York was diversity. And when you go to places like that, I learned so much about local cultures there, but there's not nearly as much diversity. I mean, I love Hong Kong and I love the Netherlands, but they don't have diversity the same way we have that here. And so again, that's part of my journey coming back here and embracing all of that. But to your point, you know, I think it's on both fronts. Now I'm in a place where, yes, I'm a little bit more open-minded. I mean, I'd like to believe I was always open-minded, but we can always be more open-minded. We can always be in a place to learn more. And I think that is part of the journey. And photography helps, you know, I think as a tool for me to help do that. And so I will wrap with just this, a journey inward. And so some of my friends are privy to some of the details around this, and in the interest of time, because I want to make sure Glenn has his time, I will just say, and this kind of builds on what we were just talking about, now I'm in a place where I really do want to take that closer, more introspective view of myself. And so there are a couple specific things, and this builds on your last question, Frank. Yes, third generation Chinese American, and yeah, proud. This is quite literal. This was taken, as you might gather, during the Stop Asian Hate movement. But the silver lining, a lot of that, again, is that it's helped me to kind of look at myself a little bit differently and maybe reanalyze in positive ways where I come from. Obviously, this is not just unique to me being Chinese American. This is, all of our experiences as we're raised, we're influenced by whoever's in front of us, whether it's our parents, our caregivers, mentors, uncles, aunts, whoever the case, or whatever the case may be. For me, obviously, that was, largely my mother, also my father, until he passed. And what I've now understood, and, some of my friends who are here know the details of this, or some more details around this, there are particular nuances to being third generation Chinese American as a girl, now a woman, of course, and the relationship that we have with our mothers. So if my mother's listening, surprise, I'm going to be bringing you into some of this project. It's about time. I probably should do some formal portraiture as well, or maybe even some street portraiture of her. But I think there's an interesting, notion to analyzing what that relationship actually looks like, and what that means specifically for me. And then also being able to showcase that to other, fellow community members, and even maybe some of my friends or colleagues who have navigated some of the beauty of that relationship, but also some of the complexities of that relationship. And I think, this could be an interesting way to dig into that. I think I get a lot out of it, or hopefully I will get a lot out of it, but hopefully this also ends up being an opportunity for others to share their versions of those stories as well. And there's maybe another project that I'm thinking of and just starting to kind of kick off, but I'll save that for another time. So anyway, that's where I am. I'm in a place where obviously you can see I've done a lot of work. It's now, a place where I can reflect quite a bit behind me, and continue to do some of that as well to help, inform how I move forward from here. So I hope I didn't go too well over time, but thank you so much for the opportunity again. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
And if anyone has any questions, now would be the time to ask any questions if you have. No, we'll take a little bit of a break.
I've overwhelmed. I know it's a journey. Yes.
What is it you went in different places all over the world, in different situations, like those children that were left because their parents had to be working in the fields. I myself just had something. I went for myself to be shooting at the carousel in Brooklyn. And none of the parents said anything. And yet I had one of the official workers who refused to give a name, telling me, oh, some of the parents are upset. In the meantime, no parents spoke to me. How do you deal with that sort of thing? I mean, when people come and say, oh, no, don't take me, or don't take my kid, of course you don't.
Sure.
But I told this person, hey, look, this is a public place. There's no expectation of privacy.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it?
So I'll give it maybe a couple part answer to that. One is it might be a little bit easier for me than it is for you. And I don't mean to make this just about gender, but there is some reality to that. I'm probably not, I'm not that you're a threatening looking person. I don't mean to imply that whatsoever, but I think sometimes there are unfortunately deeply embedded assumptions in our societies that say, some people are more likely to cause harm than others. And again, I'm not saying that's you, but I think as, a woman like myself, I don't think I appear to be someone who's going to be very threatening. With kids, I think you have to be really, careful. I try to be very careful about it. Sometimes I do take the approach, as we do oftentimes as photographers, of take the photograph now and ask for, forgiveness later, as opposed to ask for permission up front, because otherwise you lose that moment. And I think that's, especially with kids, that's important because, not that they become overly self-conscious like sometimes adults become, but there is something that then you can see the pictures I've taken of most of these kids, with the exception of that one, of the three children in Vietnam, where that was, a little bit more of a, a preset portrait, if you will. Usually I'm capturing them doing something. And if I just ask them, or I'm asked their parent for permission, it's gone, and the photograph is just, it's a memory, and that can be fine sometimes. But, I think it's hard to answer that, because I think it really depends on the feeling. I usually go with the gut feeling. I've been doing this for such a long time now. I can kind of get a sense for the scene. If there are parents nearby and I feel like there might be sensitivity for whatever reason, given the context of the scene, then I might lean towards asking for a little permission, or at least holding up my camera. And sometimes it's as simple as that, and just, making parents aware that it's happening. But, sometimes you do have to be a little bit more explicit, and that can be frustrating, I know.
That's why I was in such a conundrum. Because not one parent spoke to me,
Yeah,
and then later, this one woman who was, ticket taker, wouldn't give me her name, which
Yeah.
is like a giveaway that, she's got her own little agenda.
yeah,
But no parent complained, and I had all different types that you would associate with being very strict
Sure.
about people interacting with their children. Most of the time, I'm walking down the street, forget the camera. You smile at the kid, you wave.
yeah.
The parents are thrilled.
Yeah.
Well, they're scared of you.
I wasn't saying that, Frank. No, but I mean, I think. But by the way, this is not just about kids, right? And it's a whole nother conversation. Happy to continue this separately over drinks, but I mean, I think it's also with adults. Yeah.
Cultural around the world, or is it just like, because there's so much going on in this country today?
I think with kids, it's universal, because parents, of course, I'm not a parent, but if I was a parent, I'd be pretty protective of my kid, and of course you're gonna be fine. So I come from a place of respecting that, because they don't know who I am. Like, unless it's a friend of mine, they have no idea. I mean, I can, like I said, I can look harmless, or I think I look harmless. They have zero idea, right? And so I to your point, I try to strike the balance. Sometimes just a smile is enough, to communicate that even if you're taking a picture without permission, that like you're not a threatening presence, and that makes it a little bit softer, on the delivery, and they might be a little bit more accepting. But yeah, I mean, there are cultural elements too. And, by the way, on an adult level, I've been to places like Morocco where photographing women is incredibly difficult. And that was hard for me, because I desperately love to photograph women around the world. And I think they're stunningly beautiful, but there are obviously very specific cultural and religious reasons why that's not accepted. And even the women themselves will oftentimes be like, no. And so I always respect that, if that ends up being the situation, of course. It's only happened to me, honestly, I can count on one hand how many times it's happened to me around the world where I have photographed and someone was a little bit upset. And I, of course, just apologize and delete the picture.
One of the focus now that's strange, that was the ticket taker who was complaining, and none of the parents the whole time ever did.
Are you familiar with Amy Tan?
Yes. Yes,
Have you ever thought of doing a photo essay about you and your mother, or?
that is in process. Hi, Mom.
Great.
Yes, it's something I'm definitely thinking about. Yes.
And one of your friends.
When it comes to your ideology of applying the wonder type to the photo.
Sorry, applying ideology of,
The ideology of the wonder type.
Yes.
To your photos. Is there a different emotional resonance, or is there a difference in the emotional resonance that you look for in the human world versus the natural?
Trevor, always with the deep, thoughtful questions. I'm going to try to answer that, and hopefully I'm actually addressing what you're actually asking. I mean, for me, and I have had others point this out to me, I have a very strong, I'd like to believe, animals probably don't care about me at all, but I like to believe I have a strong bond with animals. I am very much drawn to animals. I love their energy. And sometimes, and maybe this is inappropriate, I almost assign a certain level of humanity to animals, and that's part of the reason that I love photographing them, because I think by capturing their likeness, that helps make us more empathetic as human beings. And so there's sort of this mirroring effect that kind of takes place. Obviously, from an emotional component, I mean, it's on me, right? I can't speak to the emotions of an animal. That's, I mean, I'm trying to capture this and have that image that I capture resonate on an emotional level with the humans, of course, that are observing that picture on the back end of that. I'd like to believe I have an emotional connection with animals, but, other than my own pets, I don't know that that's necessarily a reality. But I do think, joking aside, that especially when you're close to animals, like the gorilla I photographed, for example, like, I'm not going to say he had any emotional connection with me. I had a very deep emotional connection to him. It was a very moving experience, but, he just sees me as background noise, thankfully. Otherwise, you could tear him into shreds. But I do feel like, my goal in capturing a portrait like that is to capture the essence of humanity in a way that people who look at that picture can say, I feel that energy. I actually care about that animal in the same way that you do. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but, I don't think we can capture emotional range the same with animals that we can with humans. But I think the way and the style that we actually capture images of animals can communicate the emotions we're trying to communicate.
Thank you, Deb.
Great, thank you.